The clatter of forks on cheap ceramic, the hiss of the grill, the low murmur of a dozen conversations. That was Ruby's world. She was the invisible woman, pouring coffee for men who never made eye contact. But on a rainy Tuesday, two men walked in who would change everything. One was Griffin Redwood, a man who owned the city's skyline, his face etched with a stress she'd never seen on a billionaire. The other was his son, Leo, a small, silent boy who lived in a world no one else could enter. When the boy's world shattered in the middle of the diner, Griffin saw only a problem. Ruby. She saw a person. She had no idea that one simple act of kindness would ignite a war for a child's soul and unearth a secret that would bring a titan to his knees. The Blue Point Diner wasn't a destination. It was a pit stop. It smelled of stale coffee and bacon grease, a comforting, greasy perfume that clung to Ruby's clothes long after her double shifts ended. At 26, Ruby felt as worn and cracked as the diner's vinyl booths. She'd been saving for a dream that felt more like a fantasy, a small outreach center for kids like her little brother Matthew. But that dream was buried under a mountain of student debt and medical bills for a brother who was no longer here. She was halfway through a 12-hour shift, her feet throbbing in her worn-out sneakers, when the bell above the door chimed. The rain-soaked man who entered was wildly out of place. His suit was a deep charcoal wool, tailored so precisely it probably cost more than her car. He held the hand of a small boy, about 7 years old, who was bundled in a pristine jacket. The man was Griffin Redwood. Ruby knew the face. You couldn't live in this city and not know it. Redwood Industries was a monolith, and he was the king. But the king looked broken. His dark hair was matted with rain, and there were deep, purple shadows under his eyes. He scanned the diner with a hunted look, as if expecting an attack. The boy, his son, was a beautiful child, with his father's dark hair and pale porcelain skin, but his eyes were fixed on the floor. He didn't look up. Not once. "Just a booth," Griffin muttered to the hostess, who fumbled with the menus. They slid into the booth by the window. Ruby grabbed her notepad. "Hi, folks, what can I get?" She trailed off. The man, Griffin, was staring at his phone, his thumb scrolling furiously. The boy, Leo, had his hands clamped tightly over his ears, his body vibrating with a low, visible tension. The diner's noise, the blender, the chatter, a server dropping a tray of silverware, was a physical assault to him. "Sir, can I get you something?" Ruby tried again, her voice soft. Griffin looked up, his eyes unfocused. "What?" "Yes. Coffee. Black. And whatever. Pancakes. For him." He gestured dismissively at the boy and looked back at his phone. Ruby bit her lip. "And for the young man? Does he like pancakes?" "He won't eat them," Griffin said, not unkindly, just with a profound, soul-crushing exhaustion. "Just bring them." Ruby nodded and put in the order. When she returned with the coffee, the situation had deteriorated. The pancakes had arrived, and Leo was staring at them as if they were a threat. The syrup in its sticky bottle had been placed too close to his plate. He began to rock, his hands flapping in short, sharp bursts. "Leo, stop it." "Just stop," Griffin hissed, his face red with a mixture of embarrassment and helplessness. A few customers at the counter turned to stare. "That kid needs a lesson in manners," one of them, a regular named Hank, muttered. Griffin's head snapped up. "Mind your own business." The confrontation was all it took. The tension in the air, the strange smells, the staring eyes, the angry voice of his father. It was too much. Leo let out a shriek. It wasn't a tantrum. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. He slid from the booth and huddled underneath the table, pressing his hand so hard against his ears his knuckles were white. Leo, for God's sake! Griffin dropped to his knees, trying to drag his son out. We're leaving. Just get out! But Leo was jammed in, screaming now, a high-pitched wail that made Ruby's heart clench. Hey, Ruby said, her voice suddenly sharp, not at the boy, but at Griffin. He froze. Give me a minute, she said. She didn't ask. She commanded. She looked at Hank at the counter. Hank, put a quarter in the jukebox. B17. Do it now. Hank, startled, did as he was told. A low, soft, instrumental track began to play, covering the harsh silence. Ruby then grabbed a bottle of ketchup and a clean, empty plate. She crouched down, not near the opening where Griffin was, but on the other side, near the wall. She didn't look at Leo. She didn't try to touch him. She just sat on the floor, her back against the booth, and began to draw on the empty plate with the ketchup. She drew a simple, smiling face. Then she took a handful of crackers from her apron pocket and started lining them up, like a wall, around the plate. The screaming from under the table subsided, replaced by hitched, watery breaths. Ruby kept going. She took a menu. This is a good house, she murmured to herself, folding the menu into a tent. She placed it next to the plate. And every house needs a fence. She lined up more crackers. A small, pale hand snaked out from under the table. It hovered, then slowly, deliberately, picked up one of the crackers from the end of her line and placed it an inch further, continuing the fence. Ruby didn't react. She didn't gasp or turn. She just pushed another cracker toward the hand. Needs to be stronger, she whispered. The hand took it. They built a fence of crackers for a full minute. Then, Ruby took a small dollop of whipped cream from a nearby sundae dish and put it on a clean spoon. She held it out. Not to the boy, but to the ketchup face. Mr. Face is hungry, she said. The small hand emerged again. It took the spoon from her. There was a pause. The spoon vanished under the table. When it came back, it was empty. Ruby slid another spoonful over. This time, Leo's head peeked out. His eyes were red and puffy, but they were clear. He was looking at her. He took the spoon. Griffin Redwood was on his knees on the diner's grimy floor, his billion-dollar suit forgotten. He watched this waitress, this complete stranger, do what a team of specialists at the Parkview Pediatric Center hadn't been able to do in 6 months. She had reached his son. After 5 minutes, Leo had crawled out from under the table. He was sitting in the booth, quietly eating small bites of whipped cream. He was still non-verbal, still in his own world, but the terror was gone. Ruby stood up, her knees cracking. She brushed off her apron. I, Griffin stammered, standing up. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning. It's okay, Ruby said, her voice back to its neutral, professional tone. He just doesn't like his food touching, and the noise was too much. He needed a focus. She started to clear the plates. Griffin's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. His grip was steel. Who are you? He demanded. Ruby gently pulled her wrist free. I'm Ruby. Your waitress. The pancakes are on the house. She walked away. Griffin watched her go, his mind racing. He threw a $100 bill on the table, a sum so large it was almost an insult. He grabbed Leo's hand, a little too tight, and rushed out of the diner. Ruby found the bill when she went to bus the table. Underneath it was his black, ridiculously heavy business card. On the back, 3 words were scrawled in messy, urgent script. Call me. About Leo. Ruby stared at the business card for 2 days. It sat on her rickety nightstand, a stark black square of wealth in her small beige apartment. Griffin Redwood, CEO, Redwood Industries. It felt like holding a grenade. Part of her, the practical part, screamed at her to throw it away. This was a world she didn't belong in. Billionaires didn't frequent the Blue Point Diner unless something was wrong. They were predators, or at best, emotional tourists. She'd seen how he'd tried to drag his son, how his first reaction was anger and embarrassment, not compassion. But another part of her couldn't forget the boy. She couldn't forget the feeling of his small hand taking the cracker, the flicker of connection in his terrified eyes. It was the same look she'd seen in her brother Matthew's eyes, just before the world became too loud for him. Too. Matthew had been her reason for everything. After their parents died, she'd been his only caregiver. She'd enrolled in child psychology, specializing in spectrum disorders, working 2 jobs to pay for his therapies. But she'd failed. A flu, a weakened immune system, and he was gone at 9 years old. She'd dropped out of school, the debt and the grief a twin anchor, and had been treading water ever since. Seeing Leo was like seeing a ghost she could help. On the 3rd day, she made the call. A crisp, sterile voice answered. Mr. Redwood's office. Hi, my name is Ruby. He left me his card. The line was silent for a beat. Ms. Ruby. Yes, we have been expecting your call. Mr. Redwood requests your presence at the Redwood Tower this afternoon, 3 o'clock. A car will be at your address in 1 hour. The line clicked dead. Ruby stared at her phone. We've been expecting you. It sounded ominous. The car was a black Mercedes that looked more like a spaceship. The ride to the city centre was silent, the driver separated by a pane of glass. The Redwood Tower was a spear of glass and steel that pierced the clouds. Ruby, in her cleanest and only blazer, felt like a field mouse in a hawk's nest. She was escorted to the top floor, a penthouse office that was larger than her entire apartment building. The walls were glass, offering a view of the city that made her dizzy. Griffin Redwood was not there. Instead, a woman was waiting. She was tall, painfully thin, and dressed in a severe navy blue suit. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch the skin of her face. She looked at Ruby with an expression of profound disappointment. You must be Ruby, the woman said. Her voice was like ice cracking. I am Brenda, Griffin's sister-in-law. Hello, Ruby said, offering a hand. Brenda looked at Ruby's hand, with its unmanicured nails and the faint scar from a grill burn, and refused to take it. Griffin's late wife, Melissa, was my sister, Brenda continued, as if that explained everything. Since her tragic passing, I have taken on the management of the family's affairs, specifically Leo. He's a sweet boy, Ruby offered. He is a complex boy, Brenda corrected. He is on the severe end of the spectrum. He requires a team of behavioral therapists, nutritionists, and specialists. We have the finest team in the country at the Park View Center. What he doesn't need, Ms. I'm sorry, I don't believe I have your last name. I didn't give it. How fitting. What Leo doesn't need is an untrained, uneducated diner waitress interfering with his dietary regimen. Whipped cream? Do you have any idea the effect of that much processed sugar on his system? Ruby bristled. He was in the middle of a sensory overload. He was terrified. He needed a de-escalation, not a nutritional breakdown. And you're the expert? Brenda's laugh was a sharp, humorless bark. I know what a scared kid looks like, Ruby said, her voice low. Mr. Redwood is a man driven by emotion since my sister's death. He saw what he thought was a breakthrough. I am here to tell you that it was a fluke. We have it handled. Your services, she said the word with clear disgust, are not required. She slid a checkbook across the vast marble desk. I am, however, prepared to compensate you for your time and for your Discretion. $5,000. In return, you will not contact Mr. Redwood or his family again. Ruby looked at the check. $5,000. It would cover her rent for 6 months. It was more money than she'd had in her bank account, ever. It was a bribe. Ruby met Brenda's cold, reptilian gaze. You're scared. Brenda's posture stiffened. I beg your pardon? You're terrified, Ruby said, a sudden, dangerous clarity cutting through her fear. I was in that diner. He wasn't just your boss. He was your boss's boss. You're the one in charge of managing Leo. And in a public diner, you or your team weren't there. He was alone. And you failed. I didn't just show up your specialists. I showed you up. And you can't have that. Before Brenda could respond, the private elevator doors chimed. Griffin Redwood strode into the room, his tie loosened, his jacket gone. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were electric. He ignored Brenda completely. Ruby, you came. Mr. Redwood, Brenda said, standing. I was just handling this. I've explained to her that we have the situation under control. Griffin's gaze finally landed on his sister-in-law. It was not a kind look. Brenda, why don't you go? Manage the foundation. I need to speak with Ms. Ruby alone. Griffin, I really must advise. Now, Brenda. The word was quiet, but it had the force of a sonic boom. Brenda's face flushed a deep, angry red. She grabbed her impossibly expensive bag and stormed out, slamming a glass door behind her. Griffin sighed and ran a hand through his hair. I apologize for her. She means well. He didn't sound convinced. He walked to the window, looking down at the city. They all mean well. The doctors, the therapists, Brenda. They have schedules, charts, and approved interventions. And my son is getting quieter, more brittle. He's fading. He turned to face Ruby. Then there's you, a waitress in a diner. You didn't have a chart. You didn't try to correct him. You saw him. You saw Leo. I just gave him some space, Ruby said, uncomfortable with the intensity of his gaze. You gave him a choice, Griffin countered. You built a fence. You gave him a safe space on a plate. I've spent millions of dollars on safe spaces, and none of them worked. He walked over to his desk, picked up a single sheet of paper, and held it out. It was a simple, one-page document. A contract. I don't want you to be his nanny, Griffin said. I have nannies. They're useless. I don't want you to be his therapist. I have those too. They're limited. He locked his eyes on hers. I want to hire you to be his, I don't even know the word, his companion, his advocate, his friend. I want you to do what you did in the diner. I want you to just be with him. An hour a day, 5 hours. Whatever you want. I'll pay you 10 times what you make at that diner. Ruby looked at the paper. The number written on it made her sick to her stomach. It was a yearly salary. It was more than she'd ever dreamed of. It was enough to build Matthew's Center. Mr. Redwood, I'm not qualified, she said, her voice shaking. I'm not. I dropped out of college. I don't care about your qualifications. I care about the results. I watched you for 5 minutes. You're more qualified than anyone on my payroll. Ruby's mind was spinning. This was a lifeline. This was a trap. This was everything. She thought of Brenda's face, full of hate. She thought of Leo's hand, full of trust. I have conditions, she said, surprised at her own audacity. Griffin actually smiled. It was a small, tired smile, but it was real. I'm listening. First, Ruby said, planting her feet, I'm not his nanny, and I'm not his friend. I'm just Ruby. I'm an advocate, and I report to you, not to Brenda. She's not to be involved in my sessions with Leo. Done, Griffin said immediately. Second, I want access to his files, all of them, the real ones from the Parkview Center, not just the summaries Brenda gives you. Griffin hesitated. That might be difficult. Then it's no deal. I'm not walking in blind. Done, he said, after a long pause. It will be done. And third, Ruby said, taking a deep breath, you have to be there. Not in the room, not hovering. But you have to be home. You can't just be a name on a check, Mr. Redwood. That's not how this works. He needs his father. Not just a new toy. Griffin was silent. He studied her. She had just given him, a man who fired people for being 2 minutes late, a list of demands. And she was right. About all of it. My name is Griffin, he said, holding out his hand. This time he was offering to shake hers. Ruby took it. His grip was warm and firm. Welcome to Redwood Industries, Miss Ruby. The next day, Ruby's old life evaporated. She gave her 2 weeks' notice at the Blue Point, a conversation that left her former boss bewildered. The same black car picked her up, but this time it didn't take her to the tower. It took her to the Redwood estate. Estate was the wrong word. It was a fortress. Set in the hills outside the city, the house was a sprawling compound of modern glass, steel, and old-growth trees. It was breathtakingly beautiful, and, as Ruby would soon discover, as cold and sterile as an operating theatre. A housekeeper with a perpetually worried expression let her in. The floors were white marble. The walls were adorned with abstract art that looked angry, and the silence was heavy and oppressive. There was no clutter, no life. Mr. Leo is in the sensory room, the housekeeper whispered, as if speaking too loudly would shatter the fragile peace. She led Ruby down a hall to a set of sound-proofed double doors. This, Ruby thought, must be one of the safe spaces Griffin had mentioned. It was not a child's room, it was a lab. The lighting was a dim, antiseptic blue. One wall was padded. In the corner sat an incredibly expensive-looking sensory pod. The air hummed with the sound of a white noise machine. And in the center of the room, on a small, hard mat, sat Leo. He was lining up wooden blocks. Red, blue, red, blue. His face was blank, his eyes unfocused. Brenda was in the corner, observing, with a man in a white coat who held a tablet. As you can see, Dr. Parrish, Brenda was saying, the new medication protocol is working wonders. His agitation is down 80%. He's certainly compliant, Dr. Parrish noted, typing on his tablet. Ruby, Brenda said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. You're here. We're in the middle of Leo's scheduled therapy block. Hello, Brenda. Dr. Parrish, Ruby said, her voice steady. She ignored them and walked over to Leo. She sat on the floor, cross-legged, a few feet away. She didn't touch him. She didn't speak. She just sat. And she watched. Leo continued his pattern. Red, blue, red, blue. His movements were rhythmic, but sluggish, lifeless. This was not the same child from the diner. The terror was gone, but so was the spark. He was a ghost. His agitation is down, Ruby said to the room, her eyes still on Leo. Or he's just sedated. Brenda stiffened. Dr. Parrish is the foremost expert. Dr. Parrish, Ruby said, finally looking at him. What happens if you introduce a yellow block? Dr. Parrish frowned. We don't introduce stimuli. We are working on pattern recognition and compliance. So what? He just lines up blocks all day? Ruby asked. He's not a robot. She reached into her bag. She'd brought a few things from her old Matthew box. She pulled out a small, slightly lumpy, hand-knitted thing. It was supposed to be a dinosaur, but it looked more like a lopsided chicken. Its button eyes were mismatched. She placed it on the floor between them. Leo's hand, reaching for a red block, froze. His head turned. Slowly, his eyes tracked from the blocks to the lumpy dinosaur. He stared at it. "This is Spike," Ruby said softly to the dinosaur. "He's a little bit lost. He's looking for a castle." Leo's eyes flicked to her, then back to the dinosaur. "As I said," Brenda cut in, her voice sharp as glass, "we have a protocol. This introduction of unvetted items is not helpful." Leo's hand, the one that had been frozen, reached out. His small fingers hovered over Spike's knitted head. He didn't grab it. He just petted it. A single, gentle stroke. Then he looked at Ruby. Really looked at her. And in his eyes, she saw the flicker. The boy from the diner was still in there. "I think the session's over, Doctor," Ruby said. For the next 2 weeks, this became the pattern. Ruby would arrive, and Brenda would be there, a silent, menacing shadow, with a therapist or a tutor in tow. And Ruby would systematically, gently, ignore their protocols. She found out that the sensory room was Leo's cage. He was in there for hours. So, on the 3rd day, she took his hand. "Come on, Leo," she said. "We're going on an adventure." She walked him right out of the room, past a sputtering Brenda. "He has a schedule." And out the massive glass doors into the back garden. Brenda had warned her it was a bad idea. "He's allergic to the outdoors, the pollen." The garden was Griffin's late wife's passion project. It had been left to go wild, a beautiful, overgrown jungle of roses and ivy. Leo, who had been in sterile environments his whole life, froze at the door. The feeling of grass under his shoes made him stumble. The smell of the air made him cover his nose. Ruby sat in the dirt. "It's okay to be messy," she said. She dug her hands into the soft earth and pulled up a fat, wiggling earthworm. "Look at this guy. He's the gardener." Leo watched from a safe distance on the stone patio. Ruby began to build. She gathered twigs and leaves. She made a little hut for Spike the dinosaur. She hummed a tune, a simple, repetitive melody. After 20 minutes, Leo crept closer. He sat on the patio steps, just watching. Ruby found a bright red ladybug. "Oh, Spike, look, a friend." Leo got onto his hands and knees. He crawled slowly onto the grass. He got dirt on the knees of his expensive pants. He crawled over to the ladybug and just watched it. A small, quiet sound came from his throat. A hum. It was the same rhythm as the song Ruby had been humming. Ruby felt tears prick her eyes. This was the first sound she'd ever heard him make. From the window of his home office, Griffin Redwood, on a conference call with his board in Tokyo, watched the entire scene. He saw his son, on his hands and knees in the mud, humming. He saw Ruby, sitting in the dirt with him, not as a therapist, but as a co-conspirator. He muted the call. He watched his son, a boy he'd been told was agitated and allergic, get dirt on his face and smile. A tiny, fleeting smile. But it was real. Griffin came home at 4 p.m. that day. He never came home before 9. He found Ruby and Leo in the kitchen, a place the housekeeper said Leo never went. Ruby was showing him how to make ketchup faces on crackers. "Griffin," Ruby said, surprised. "Mr. Redwood," the housekeeper said. Shocked, Leo just looked at his father, his face smeared with ketchup, and then looked back at his cracker. "Brenda mentioned you were outside," Griffin said, his voice rough. "We were," Ruby said, bracing for a fight. "We found a worm and a ladybug." Griffin just nodded. He looked at his son. "A ladybug, huh?" Leo didn't respond. He just carefully placed an olive for an eye. Later that evening, Ruby was leaving when she found a locked door at the end of the West Wing. It was different from the others. An old, heavy oak door. She'd heard from the housekeeping staff that it was off-limits. As she passed, she saw Brenda standing in front of it, her hand on the knob. Her back was to Ruby. Brenda didn't go in. She just stood there for a long moment, her shoulders rigid. Then she seemed to shudder, and she walked away quickly. Curious, Ruby tried the knob. It was locked tight. A keyhole, not a keycard. "That's Mrs. Redwood's old art studio," the housekeeper whispered, appearing out of nowhere. "Miss Brenda keeps it locked. Ever since the accident. She says it's too painful for Mr. Leo to see." Ruby looked at the door. She had a feeling it wasn't Leo who found it painful. It was Brenda. A month into Ruby's employment, the atmosphere at the Redwood estate had shifted. The sterile silence was still there. But now it was punctuated. Sometimes it was the sound of Ruby's humming, a tune Leo had adopted as his own. Sometimes it was the sound of Leo himself, who had started to make more vocalizations. Not words, but sounds of contentment when they were in the garden, or frustration when Ruby, playfully, put a block in the wrong place. Griffin was a different man. He still worked long hours, but 4 p.m. check-ins became a regular occurrence. He'd appear in the kitchen or the garden, his suit jacket off, his tie in his pocket. He didn't know how to play. Not really, but he was learning how to be. He'd sit on the grass, a safe distance from the dirt, and just watch. He'd ask Ruby questions. Not, "What's his progress?" but, "What did you two do today?" Brenda was simmering. Her power was being eroded, and she knew it. Ruby had effectively barred her from the Leo sessions, using Griffin's own directive. Brenda's response was to double down on the one thing she still controlled: the Redwood Foundation. "Griffin, darling," she announced one evening, cornering him and Ruby in the foyer. "I've planned the annual foundation gala. It's time. It's been 2 years since Melissa, and the board is getting restless. We need to show a strong, united front." Griffin winced. He hated these events. "Brenda, is it really necessary?" "It is," she insisted. "It's for the Melissa Redwood Children's Wing. We're hosting it here, at the house, a simple, elegant dinner for the top donors. 2 weeks from Friday." Griffin looked at Ruby, a silent plea for help. "A party?" Ruby asked. "Here? With Leo?" Brenda's smile was a slash of red lipstick. "Oh, heavens, no. That's the best part. It's a formal, adult-only affair. Leo will be comfortably sequestered in his wing. My team will be with him. He won't even know it's happening." Ruby felt a cold knot of anger in her stomach. Sequestrated? Like a prisoner? In his own house? "He's a child, Ruby," Brenda snapped. "A child with severe sensory issues. A ballroom full of 100 strangers, loud music, and perfume is not an enrichment opportunity. It's a melt-down opportunity. I'm protecting him." "You're hiding him," Ruby shot back. "That's enough," Griffin said, holding up a hand. The argument was giving him a headache. "Brenda, it's my house. We'll have the dinner. Ruby, she has a point, but Brenda does too. Leo, he's not ready." "He's not ready because you keep him in a bubble," Ruby said. But she said it to Griffin's retreating back. For the next 2 weeks, the house was chaos. Florists, caterers from the Gilded Ledge, and party planners descended, transforming the cold house into an elegant, impersonal event space. Brenda was in her element, a whirlwind of sharp commands and critical glances. Ruby focused on Leo. She could feel his anxiety rising with the noise and the strange people. "It's just a party," Ruby told him, as they sat in the now locked garden. "Brenda's orders? To protect the hydrangeas. Just a bunch of loud, silly grown-ups. We'll just hang out in your room and build the biggest block tower ever." But she had an idea, a dangerous one. The night of the gala, the house was unrecognizable. The driveway was a line of limousines. Music, a live string quartet, drifted through the halls. Ruby, who had been told to use the service entrance, was upstairs in Leo's wing, which was a full 2 floors away from the ballroom. Brenda's team, 2 stone-faced nannies, were there, along with Dr. Parrish. "We have his evening medication ready," Dr. Parrish said, holding a small paper cup. "It will help him sleep through the festivities." Ruby looked at the pill. It was the same one she'd seen him given before, the one that left him groggy and compliant. "No." "I beg your pardon," Dr. Parrish said, insulted. "I said no," Ruby said, taking the cup from him. "He's not being drugged tonight just because you're all too lazy to actually handle him. He's not a dog to be sedated. We're going to have a bath, and then we're going to read." Dr. Parrish and Brenda, who had just swept in, were furious. But before they could argue, Ruby had swept Leo into his bathroom and locked the door. An hour later, the party was in full swing. Griffin was circulating, shaking hands, his face a mask of polite interest. Brenda was at his side, radiant, accepting praise for the brave work the foundation was doing. Upstairs, Ruby had a surprise. She'd spent her own money, a ridiculous amount, at a children's formal wear shop. "Okay, Leo," she said, pulling a small garment bag from his closet. "If they're all going to be fancy, we're going to be fancier." She'd bought him a miniature tuxedo. He let her dress him, his eyes wide with curiosity at the silky material and the funny little tie. When she was done, she stood him in front of the full-length mirror. Leo stared. He tilted his head. He touched the bow tie. He looked like his father. He looked like a little man. "See?" Ruby whispered. "You're the boss." And then Leo did something he'd never done. He walked over to Ruby, who was sitting on the floor, and he gently, awkwardly, patted her on the head. A mimicry of affection he must have seen, but a contact he initiated. "You're right, Leo," Ruby whispered, her throat thick. "You're the boss." She heard the music from the ballroom. It was a simple, classical waltz. "Let's go see," she said. "You cannot be serious," one of the nannies said, blocking the door. "He lives here," Ruby said, her eyes flashing. "This is his house. We're not going in. We're just going to look from the landing." She took Leo's hand. He held on tight. They walked past the nannies, down the long, carpeted hall, to the grand staircase that overlooked the main ballroom. They sat on the top step, hidden in the shadows. Below them was a sea of black ties and glittering gowns. Leo watched, his head tilted. He wasn't covering his ears. The music was soft. The lights were low. He was fascinated. Down below, Griffin was giving a speech. "And in my late wife's name, we will continue to help those who..." He was losing the thread. He hated this. Brenda, seeing him falter, stepped up to the microphone. "What my brother-in-law means to say," she began, her voice smooth, "is that the Redwood Foundation is a beacon. We are..." That's when Leo, from the top of the stairs, saw the piano. It was a grand piano, a beautiful black Steinway, sitting on the edge of the ballroom, untouched. He let go of Ruby's hand. "Leo, no," Ruby whispered. But it was too late. He was moving. He wasn't running. He was walking, with a purpose she had never seen. He walked down the grand staircase, a tiny, perfectly dressed figure. A gasp went through the crowd. "Whose child is that?" Brenda's speech faltered. Her eyes went wide with horror. "Leo," Griffin turned. His heart stopped. His son, in a tuxedo, walking through a crowd of 100 strangers. Leo ignored everyone. He walked straight to the piano. He reached up his small hands, and he pressed one key, a single, perfect, middle C. The note hung in the air, clear and true. The string quartet stopped playing. The entire ballroom went silent. Leo looked at the key. He pressed it again. C. Griffin started to move, to rescue him. But Ruby, who had run down the stairs after him, put a hand on Griffin's arm. "Wait." Leo looked up from the piano. He scanned the room, his eyes wide, but not terrified, curious. He saw the 100 faces staring at him. He saw his aunt, her face a mask of thunder. Then he saw his father. Griffin was standing there, his own face a mess of confusion and pride. He'd never seen his son do anything so bold. Leo looked at his dad, and then he smiled, a real, genuine smile. He pressed the key one more time, C, as if to say, "I did this." Then he turned and walked, just as calmly, back to his father, and took his hand. The ballroom was in stunned silence. Griffin looked down at his son, then at the crowd. He'd been about to give a speech about his Troubled Sons Foundation. And here was his son, looking more composed than anyone in the room. Griffin leaned down and, without a second thought, swung Leo up into his arms. He held his son. In front of everyone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Griffin said, his voice, now clear and strong, booming through the room. "Thank you for coming. Please, allow me to introduce the real guest of honor, my son, Leo Redwood." A smattering of polite, confused applause started. Ruby stood off to the side, tears streaming down her face. She had won. But as she looked across the room, she locked eyes with Brenda. The woman was not clapping. She was staring at Ruby. And if looks could kill, Ruby would have been a pile of ash on the imported Italian marble. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. It was a declaration of war. The week after the gala was deceptively quiet. Brenda was gone, and Griffin, in a burst of post-gala confidence, had dismissed her entire team. For the first time, a fragile peace settled over the estate. Griffin, Ruby, and Leo formed a strange, tentative family. Griffin even started taking Leo to his office, where the boy would quietly build block towers on the penthouse floor. But while the house felt lighter, Ruby was digging into the darkness. Griffin had been true to his word, providing a thick binder of Leo's complete medical history from the Parkview Center. Night after night, Ruby cross-referenced the files with her old child psychology textbooks. A chilling pattern emerged. The dosages of antipsychotics and anti-anxiety medications prescribed by Dr. Parrish were astronomical for a child. They weren't meant to treat. They were designed to suppress, to induce the lifeless compliance Brenda prized. Griffin also gave her the key to Melissa's locked art studio. He couldn't bring himself to enter. "Brenda always said it was for the best," he'd murmured. The room was not a sterile space. It was a sanctuary of vibrant, chaotic color. Canvases were everywhere, but the walls were covered in paintings of Leo, laughing, sleeping as a baby. In the corner sat an unfinished portrait. It was Leo, slightly older, standing in a field, his mouth open, talking. It was a painting of a future Melissa had dreamed of. Tucked in a desk, Ruby found the journals. This was too private, but a bookmarked page caught her eye. October 14th. Brenda brought over a new specialist. Dr. Parrish. He wants to put Leo on a new medication. I don't like it. Leo isn't a level. He's a storm. You don't level a storm. You learn to dance in the rain. Brenda, she just wants him quiet. She looked at Griffin today, the way she looks at him. It terrifies me. Ruby's blood ran cold. She flipped to a later entry, November 2nd. The new meds are bad. He's not my boy. He's a doll. He just sits. Brenda says, "See? He's calm. He's not calm. He's gone. I'm throwing them out." The last entry was dated 2 days before Melissa's tragic accident. November 10th. She found out I threw them out. We had the worst fight. She called me an unfit mother. Said I was unstable. She threatened to tell Griffin. She's not helping. She's trying to take my place. She's trying to take my son. Ruby felt sick. This was a long con. This was pure malice. She was so absorbed, she jumped when her phone rang. It was Griffin. His voice was cold, colder than the first day she'd met him. "Ruby, I'm at the house. You need to come here. Now." The line clicked dead. The drive was a blur of panic. When she arrived, the house was silent. She found Griffin in his study, and Brenda was there. She was sitting in a chair, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, looking pale and victimized. "Griffin, what's wrong?" Ruby asked, her hand still clutching the journal. "Ruby," Griffin said. His voice was flat. He wouldn't look at her. "Brenda came to me this morning. She was cleaning out some of Melissa's things. She found something." He pointed to his desk. On the polished mahogany sat a pair of magnificent diamond earrings, Melissa's earrings. "My wife's earrings," Griffin said. "Brenda found them, in your locker, at the diner." Ruby's world tilted. "What? My locker? I haven't been to the diner in weeks. That's a lie." "She's a waitress, Griffin," Brenda said, her voice watery but sharp. "She comes from nothing. You brought her into this house. You gave her access to everything, to Melissa's room." Her eyes flicked to the journal. "What is that? You're stealing her journals, too." "This is a setup," Ruby yelled, her voice shaking. "Griffin, you know me. She hates me. She's been lying to you." "She's right," Griffin said. Ruby's heart stopped. "She's right," he repeated, his voice low. "You are just a waitress. You did come from nothing." He took a step toward her. Ruby flinched. "Brenda," Griffin said, his voice dangerously soft as he turned to his sister-in-law. "How did you know her manager's name? How did you know which locker was hers?" Brenda's sobs hitched. "What? I told you. You just went to pick them up?" Griffin asked. "Because you're so helpful. It's funny. I just got off the phone with Jim, the manager at the Blue Point. He said a woman did come by yesterday, said she was Ruby's sister and needed her things for a family emergency." Jim thankfully thought it was suspicious. He didn't let her in, but he did get her license plate. Griffin threw a set of car keys on the desk. "A plate that matches your Jaguar, Brenda." Brenda's face went white. "The earrings," Griffin continued, his voice rising. "A nice touch. I'm sure the security footage will show you finding them in your own purse this morning. But you made a mistake. You found them in her locker. A locker you never even got into." "Griffin, you're twisting this," Brenda shrieked. She's poisoned you against me." "No, Brenda!" Griffin's voice was a roar. "She saved me, and she saved my son. You planted evidence. You left me no choice," Brenda screamed, her mask of civility finally, completely gone. "I gave my life to you. After Melissa died, I held this family together. I managed your child. I ran your foundation. I was supposed to be. And then she came. This nothing. And you looked at her. You gave her my sister's room." "Get out," Griffin whispered, his face ashen. "What? Get out!" He pointed to the door. "Get out of my house. Get out of my company. Get out of my son's life. If you are not off this property in 5 minutes, Ruby won't be the one I'm having arrested." Brenda stared, her face a mask of pure venom. She knew she had lost. She snatched her purse and stormed out. The silence was absolute. Griffin slumped into his chair, looking broken. She was all I had left of Melissa," he whispered. "I trusted her. I trusted her with my son." "Griffin," Ruby said, her voice firm. She walked over and placed the leather-bound journal on the desk, on top of the stolen earrings. "You didn't trust her," Ruby said. "You were just blind. Now, you need to see. You need to read what your wife really thought. And you need to understand what that woman did to your son." Griffin locked himself in his study with his late wife's journals and Leo's medical files. He emerged 2 days later, his exhaustion replaced by a cold, righteous fury. He picked up the phone. His first call was to the Redwood Foundation's board. His second was to the chief of medicine at the Parkview Center. His third was to the district attorney. Brenda's fall was not a private matter. It was a public reckoning. Griffin, a man who loathed the press, called a conference. He stood before the cameras, not as a CEO, but as a father. He laid it all out, his wife's documented fears, his own willful ignorance, and the truth of what had been done to his son. A new team of doctors confirmed it. Leo had been systematically drugged with a cocktail of medications, not to treat him, but to manage him, to suppress his personality and induce lethargy. It was a calculated case of Munchausen by proxy, not for sympathy, but for control of an heir and an empire. The Parkview scandal was front-page news. Brenda was arrested. Dr. Parrish was stripped of his medical license. But on the quiet Redwood estate, the real miracle was unfolding. Leo was weaned off the medications, and the change was electric. The silent ghost was gone, replaced by a vibrant, furious, and wonderfully difficult 7-year-old. He had opinions. He had energy. He threw a box of cereal on the floor just to hear the sound, and for the first time in memory, Griffin Redwood laughed. The locked art studio became their sanctuary. One afternoon, all three were covered in blue paint, making a glorious mess. Griffin was tentatively painting a boat. Leo was just painting. He stopped, looked at his blue hands, and then walked over to his father. He looked at Griffin's paint-splattered sweater, then up at his face. Leo reached up a small blue hand and touched Griffin's cheek. He opened his mouth, and he spoke. It was a rusty, first-time sound. "Tip, tip." Griffin froze, dropping his paintbrush. What did you say, Leo?" Leo tried again, harder. Da. Griffin sank to his knees, his face cracking, tears welling. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, Leo. That's me. I'm Dad." Leo, hearing the new word, liked the sound. He smiled, a full, genuine smile. "Da," he said again, then laughed and slapped his blue, paint-covered hand right onto the front of Griffin's shirt. Griffin didn't even flinch. He just pulled his son into a fierce hug, burying his face in the boy's hair, not caring about the paint, not caring about anything except the small, warm body in his arms. Over Leo's head, his eyes met Ruby's. She was crying, and he knew his own face was a mess. He didn't have to say thank you or you saved us. His look said something new and terrifying and wonderful. It said, "Don't leave." The woman at the podium was no longer a waitress. Ruby, now in a simple blue dress, stood in the sunlit hall of the Melissa and Matthew Center, a place built from the ashes of Brenda's lies. The room was packed. This was not a clinic. It was a sanctuary. "I used to pour coffee," Ruby began, her voice steady. "I thought my job was to be invisible. We're taught to look for saviors in glass towers, but change doesn't start with a protocol. It starts with a cracker and a ketchup face. It starts when you stop trying to fix a person and you just see them." Her speech was for them. In the front row, Griffin Redwood watched her, his gaze filled with a quiet, steady love that had grown over months of shared struggle and healing. Next to him sat Leo. Now 8, he was no longer a ghost, but a present, vibrant boy, learning to navigate a world that was still too loud, but no longer terrifying. As Ruby finished, Leo stood and walked to the podium with solemn purpose. He reached into his pocket and pulled out Spike, the lumpy dinosaur. He held it out to her. Ruby knelt to take it, her eyes filling with tears. Leo leaned in and kissed her on the cheek. The room, full of reporters and parents, erupted in soft, tear-filled applause. Griffin joined them on stage. He put one hand on Leo's shoulder, and, with the other, he found Ruby's. His fingers laced with hers. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was messy, complicated, and built from the ruins. It was a new family. "Da," Leo said, tapping the microphone, intrigued by the sound. Griffin looked at his son, then at the woman holding his hand. He had been a billionaire, poor in every way that mattered. Now, holding the hands of a former waitress and a little boy who loved the color blue, Griffin Redwood was, for the very first time, the richest man in the world. He hadn't just been changed by her. He had been saved. What a story. It just goes to show you that you never, ever know who is walking into your life, or whose life you are about to walk into. The person you might dismiss, the person who seems invisible, might be the only one who can truly see you. Ruby thought she was just serving coffee, but she was about to serve up a lesson in love, courage, and true justice. What did you think of Brenda's ultimate karma? And how powerful was that final moment with Leo? We all have a Blue Point diner in our lives, a place we feel stuck. But what if it's just the place you're supposed to be to start the next, greatest chapter? Let me know your favorite part of this story in the comments below. Your stories and your feedback are what keep us going. And of course, if you want more stories of karma, love, and life-changing twists, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel. We have so many more stories to tell. Thank you for listening.